Wings and L.A. Law return next Thursday with all new episodes. Now stay tuned for David Letterman's 10th anniversary special.
Believe me, I'm just as sick as you are about preempting L.A. Law.
Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners.
And the lighting that I did for it was actually meant to be somewhat reflective of the cover, what I intellectualized about the cover for Action Comics #1, where as he's lifting this car to throw down, his head is tilted downward, and I was imagining with the lighting being a little bit cooler and not necessarily, this intense bright lighting on him, but in effect light coming from below as if it's the city below him lighting him.
Hey everybody, welcome back. Time again for Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress with you. I'm going to present a fantastic interview I did last week with Mark Malkoff. Mark Malkoff is one of the greatest experts of Johnny Carson I have ever seen or heard. He just wrote a book called Love Johnny Carson, featuring over 400 interviews chronicling the talk show host's life, his career, and what he did after his career all the way up till his last days. Really interesting stuff. I also felt it was an interesting time to discuss the future of late night. And Mark is an expert. He is on the Late Nighter podcast and is a contributing interviewer. He and critic Bill Carter, along with John Schneider, had a wonderful discussion about the future of late night. Well, I wanted to get his opinion myself of the possible directions for things like CBS with Colbert ending, and even the futures of Jimmy Kimmel and Jimmy Fallon. All that and more in my conversation with Mark Malkoff on today's Word Balloon. Mark Malkoff, welcome to Word Balloon again. It's great that you're coming back, man, and congratulations. I mean, I respected everything you did with the Carson podcast, but now you've got this fabulous book, Love Johnny Carson.
Thank you so much for having me back. Yeah, it's good to see you. It is one of those things when I started the Carson podcast talking to people about Johnny Carson, I thought maybe if I get 10 episodes, that might be the top number, but I didn't foresee it going 8 years and talking it for the podcast and the book over 400 people. It never occurred to me.
And really, the level and depth of your research and knowledge of Johnny beyond the show is amazing. And my favorite parts are obviously the parts I didn't know about. I mean, I told you, man, I started watching in the early 70s. I have vague memories of it still being in New York. And when they made it, well, like I'm old. Well, I'm old, but truly, everything from his birth to everything he did in media before the Tonight Show is fascinating to me. And I mean, starting in radio, and also those weird, like he had his independent show. Forgive me, because I got to show that you and I could talk about this.
Sure,
but
of course.
He had the local shows and everything, but then all those game shows, and it's been fun watching Buzzer. And seeing pre-Tonight Show Johnny Carson on, to tell the truth, and stuff like that. Talk about that pre-Tonight Show years for him.
Yeah, he was doing a game show called Earn Your Vacation. He did Carson Cellar. He had a 5-minute show in the morning called Carson's Coffee Break. And he's like, next year they might give me 6 minutes. So, yeah, he started local in Los Angeles. And before that, for a couple of years, he was at WOW in Omaha, Nebraska. And, yeah, he went to college, got out of the Navy, went to college, and then went right into radio, and very ambitious for him to move his family to Los Angeles. His goal was within 1 year to get his own show, similar to what he had at WOW. He had The Squirrel's Nest, which was a TV show, kind of like The Tonight Show, and his goal was within 1 year, and he was able to achieve that locally. And, even though he was local, he still had huge fans like Red Skelton and Jack Benny and all these people watching him. So it was the perfect place for him to be and develop when he got his big break when he substituted for Red Skelton when Skelton injured and got a concussion. And Skelton, as he's being carried off in the ambulance, said, "There's only one man who can take my place." And they had like 2 hours, and it was Johnny. And he was ready. I mean, he had been performing since he was 14, and he did it effortlessly. And that was his big break.
I love the fact too that even before he became a broadcaster, he was an amateur musician and then a professional musician or magician at a young age. He was also a great musician, but really all the sleight of hand stuff, the great Carsoni, that's really cool.
Yeah, he loved the magic. When he was turned 17, he graduated high school and he hitchhiked over to Los Angeles. And he would go and watch. He watched Orson Welles do magic tricks, and he snuck into the USO shows. He enlisted in the Navy, but wasn't fully in the Navy. So, yeah, he snuck in. He got a uniform that wasn't. You're not supposed to do that, and he got in trouble and got arrested. But it was definitely very impactful to go out to Los Angeles. He went to Jack Benny's home. He got like a star map and waited for Benny to come out, who didn't. But yeah, the magic was definitely, I think, the catalyst starting when he was like 13 or 14.
I was watching last night a couple clips and I caught him doing the card tricks with Angie Dickinson that one episode and doing the fan and the big wave, kind of shuffle and everything. It's he and also it was very adorable when he had the little kid, the spelling bee kid, and he popped the quarter out of the kid's ear. The kid was freaking out, which is
That
great.
really was. That's one of my favorite clips, I think, because I really it shows Carson's talent in terms of how quick he was and how good he was. That there's certain hosts that are okay talking to actors. There's certain hosts that are better talking to regular people. He could talk to anybody and make them feel comfortable, make them look good, and bring the best out of people. But that clip that you're mentioning is one of my favorites with the spelling bee champion. Yeah.
Later I want to talk about where late night is. And of course your podcast,
Sure.
your current podcast, Late Night.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's Inside Late Night on Late Nighter. We talk to people from all over the different late night shows, past and present.
You're doing a hell of a job, man, and you're
Oh,
really
thank
a
you,
great
sir.
interviewer. No, you know what you're doing, man, and you
Appreciate
make it
it.
very conversational. Clearly, the people relax when they talk to you, and you
I
get
hope
great
so.
stuff. Back to Carson.
Yeah.
I love the New York stuff because again, I have very vague memories of like maybe the final year, early 70s, and
Yeah.
before he made the jump permanently to LA. But I am fascinated by that period because it was a different vibe of guest, wouldn't you say?
It really was. I mean, you had Broadway because it's New York, and they couldn't really do that in LA as much. And they had intellectuals like Jimmy Breslin and definitely a lot more authors. And it was this small studio. It was like maybe 240 people, something like that, versus 460. So it was just a more intimate, um, I'd say more relaxed show. But when they would a couple times a year go to Los Angeles during trips, the shows would go off the rails. Like the first time they went out to LA in 1964, Johnny had this idea. He said, "We're going to have champagne for all the guests. This is going to be great. We're going to treat them really well." And Marlon Brando was on. It was a huge coup for a Brando to be doing the Tonight Show. And he back then, now they put the most famous guest on first, but back then they would put them on last to make sure the viewers would tune in. So Brando comes on last, and he's been drinking champagne for 90 minutes, and it doesn't go well, and he is wasted out of his mind. And back in a couple of years later, in 1968, and Johnny were reminiscing, and Brando's like, "Yeah, I was completely gone." But when they did go out to LA, it did seem like things like that would happen. That would be more drinking, more relaxed, and just complete anarchy. But the first 10 years, as you know, most of that was erased by NBC. So I really did make it my mission with the book and the podcast to try to come up with as much information as I could and fill in the blanks. Talking to somebody like Mel Brooks, who was on Johnny's first show, October 1st, 1962, what's going on backstage before the show, what's going on during the show, and try to fill those things in. And we did that in the book. So I'm very happy about that.
Again, incredibly extensive, and I love that you're going chronologically and pull from these various anecdotes. Everybody from the top echelon of entertainment to one of our favorites, the guy who pulled the curtain for Johnny every night.
That's right, Irving Davis. Yeah, I always wondered. I remember as a little kid asking my dad who held the curtain open for Johnny. And I just wanted to know what was going on because now I know that there's certain late night hosts like Letterman. He wouldn't want anyone to talk to him. He needs silence, and everybody has their different process. But Johnny would be back there telling jokes, smoking, just hanging out casually before the show, and then he would just go out in front of, millions of people watching him at night and just be so relaxed and in control. And yeah, he was such a master.
Again, you've got so many great extensive stories about every era of Carson. Have you really looked at, like an athlete, would you can you quantify what Carson's prime was? Would you say his prime years would be?
I'd probably say late 60s through the 70s. I think, look, when the show was 90 minutes and he had the energy to sustain it, I think an hour 45 they started, and that was rough for him 5 days a week. And he had to fight to get more vacation. But I think that probably the 70s hold up. I would say the best, but he would pace himself like an athlete every show day. Like he wouldn't have lunch with people on a show day. He'd be working the moment he got up, he'd be focused on the show, but he wouldn't be at the office all day like Jay Leno or Letterman because he thought that would really use up a lot of his energy, and he guarded it so fiercely that's one of the reasons he didn't want to see the guest normally before the show and keep it fresh, and during the commercials why he didn't normally talk to the guest. He was saving his energy. Some people might look at that as being cold and aloof, but he knew how much energy that took to do that show. And I think Gary Shandling was the one that was saying nobody knows how exhausting doing that show is. I mean, it was people that have tried that will call it murder. I mean, it's relentless, and that's why a lot of famous people that have been offered those shows will not take them. I mean, it just takes over your life.
Yeah, Neil Patrick Harris. Everyone's like, "Oh, dude,
Yeah.
you'd be amazing," and he's like, "No, thank you, no
It's
way."
brutal.
Yeah. I mean, no, it sucks your energy.
That's
You have to be built for it, Mark. I mean, honestly,
yeah.
I had 30 years in broadcasting
Mhm.
and just radio. But even just doing a 4 hour a day show, whether I was playing music or doing
Sure.
straight sports talk, it's a grind. Yeah.
It really is. And somebody like Joan Rivers was great every 5 weeks, but famously she went competed against Johnny opposite him on Fox, and if Miss Rivers would have gone to him and said, "I have this opportunity," Johnny would have blessed and said, "You have my blessing," but he would have warned her that he believed her style would not work every single night, and the
Wow.
guest would not be showing up every. She was making all these Elizabeth Taylor fat jokes and would make fun of the celebs, and it's like that style just, at least back then. He did not think you could do that every night, and he was right. The ratings they started out really high and they sunk, and after 10 months, Barry Diller went to her husband, who was the producer, and said, "You're fired." And Joan said, "If you fire him, I'm leaving." And Barry Diller said, "You're fired." Joan thought he was bluffing, and then that was it for Joan. Unfortunately, it's really sad, but I think she was great every 5 weeks. But to do it night after night after night not everyone can do that.
Absolutely. I'm fascinated by the late night format. And again,
Yeah.
growing up when I did, I saw these successes and failures. Thick of the Night, Joan Rivers.
Yes.
I had forgotten
Yeah.
until your book about David Brenner briefly having a late night show. Of course,
Yeah.
infamously Chevy Chase. And
Yeah.
again, where, oh yeah, it'll be great. Oh, you're just talking to people. How hard is that? Really goddamn hard.
Yeah. Brenner went back on with Carson very shortly after his show was canceled and said nobody should ever try to host a late night show. He's like, it's the hardest thing I've ever done. And Johnny said it's murder. And then Chevy guest hosted once for Johnny Carson in 1986 and had a really tough time. A month later, goes on with Johnny Carson and said, I didn't know how hard this was. It was one of the hardest things I ever had to do. No one will ever be the next Johnny Carson. And I guess Mr. Chase forgot how hard it was because a few years later in 1993, he takes the gig. And I know that they gave him a lot of money, but I mean, oh gosh, they famously only gave him like 26 episodes or something like that.
Well, and also that first impression matters. Back to Carson in
Yeah.
62, it took a
Mhm.
while for Johnny to catch on, having to follow Jack Parr. And am I right that of all people, and again, this may be a name that younger people
Mhm.
not might know, but they're like, maybe we should go with Merv Griffin instead. And for a
Yeah,
minute, Merv was kind of a rival back in the early 60s, wouldn't you
he
say?
was. He was a bigger name. It's really tough, I think, for the public to see that the perception of Johnny Carson was a game show host. And once the public sees you as something, it's tough. There's a lot of times an adjustment that has to take place. And people were used to Jack Part 11:30 being 11:15 being very controversial, weepy and emotional. And Johnny Carson thought the show should just be an entertainment show and no manufactured controversy. If it organically happens, that's fine. And he got criticized for being bland and dull early on. And it just took Carson, I think, a while for the public to realize. And it didn't take that long, but there was definitely an adjustment that took place for the people to accept him. But the same thing happened to Conan O'Brien, but that was like almost 2 years of him really figuring out the show. But
Yeah.
anybody that's new, it's really it's going to take at least a little bit of time.
Conan and I are the same age. In those first couple of years, I didn't like it, and he really had to grow on me.
Yeah.
But his
Yeah.
integrity and his
Mhm.
sincerity, and I had the opportunity to meet him when I was
Oh,
covering
good.
boxing at Madison Square Garden one night. Had a nice conversation with him. No, he's great, and truly the way he
Yeah.
handled the whole Leno Tonight Show thing, as documented in Bill Carter's excellent book.
Sure.
I mean, class guy, man, just class, and it
Yeah.
was so great that you got the Kennedy honor before our current
It's
situation with the
unbelievable.
Kennedy Center.
Yeah, I was going to the show early on when they couldn't fill the studio. It was only 190 some seats, and they couldn't even fill it. They tried. The NBC pages would be out on the street begging people to come to the show, and it was getting, I think, renewed every 13 weeks or 12 weeks. And Gary Shandling said no, Dana Carvey, Rosie O'Donnell, Greg Kinnear. They were trying to give it to anybody, and no one wanted it. I mean, it was kind of like the same thing, like who's going to replace David Letterman? This is like nobody can fill these shoes. And Conan persevered, and it was really exciting to see him. You know, Johnny gave him the best advice, which was like, you have to. Leading up to that, Johnny was honored at the Plaza Hotel. They had a luncheon for, I think, it was the communication dinner and luncheon rather. And he told Conan, he said, the only way it's going to work is if you're yourself and you tell the truth. And the media made Carson out to be this guy that they say cold and aloof, no friends. But everybody that I've consistently talked to, and I've said this in some interviews, the people that knew him the best told me that he was almost the same person on and off camera. But these are the people that knew him very well for years, and he felt comfortable. It was a small circle of people. But I don't think you can go out there and not be yourself and fool the American public for 30 years like that. I mean, definitely Carson was a shy person, so when he's not doing the show and just for self-preservation, he couldn't have that energy all the time just go to waste. And people were trying to get to him. He had threats in his life, so he had to be careful with that and stuff. But I really do believe that was him out there. I mean, his one of his wives said that, a bunch of people that were friends with him, maybe a little less gregarious, but he was himself, and there's no other way that would have worked without it.
Well, and also there's that expectation from the audience that, well, he's in my bedroom or living room every night, so
Yeah.
there's almost a subconscious like, well, Johnny knows me. I see him every night, and can
He,
you, and
yeah.
again, to have that kind of pressure as the entertainer, and especially doing it in New York those first 10 years when as you know, everybody's on top of each other in Manhattan,
Yeah, New York was tricky. Like it got a little bit better in Los Angeles, but when you would go out to a restaurant in New York, people would sit down at this table, like they uninvited. People were constantly sending drinks over to him, and he felt like he had to take a sip and say thank you for that. But people would grab him by the arm, and they felt like, oh, come here, meet my husband, meet my wife, and yeah, you're right. They're going to bed with this guy. They feel like this is our friend. We know him. And Johnny just couldn't get any peace. So when he's in Los Angeles, it's a lot easier. He's driving around. It's a little bit, I think famous people maybe are left alone a little bit more out there, possibly. But yeah, it was definitely, the security thing was tough. Even at NBC, people back then, the security, it's amazing to hear the stories. Back in the 60s and early 70s, like people would just get by. Like it seems like they would let anybody by. And people would just Carson would just be up in the studio floor outside the studio. And Dick Cavett remembers having to like shoo people away, tourists that just got past security that were just hanging out. So Johnny, it was hard for Carson to get any peace.
Cavett is such an interesting guy that you've had the
Yeah.
pleasure of interviewing, and he's in the book, he's in your podcast interviews, and
Yeah.
really had a perception. It's funny you say that because Cavett, of course, getting his big break was him walking into NBC unannounced and
That's
like, "Hi,
right.
I've got something for Jack Parr," and then he became a Jack Parr writer because he wrote him good jokes.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And then 1964, he wrote for Carson for about 2 years. And yeah, I'm really glad I was like Dick Cavett. I heard from his wife Martha really liked the book, and I was
Oh, that's great.
able just to kind of show. There's a really touching thing when Stan Laurel passed away, the day that Stan Laurel and Cavett had known Laurel, and Johnny had been on the phone with Stan Laurel a couple of times in the hospital, and Cavett remembers just going into Johnny's office to drop off jokes, and Johnny had tears in his eyes, and he's like you've heard, and they kind of bonded over that. But Cavett was just really super, and just to hear that story. I mean, Cavett's told it before, but when Cavett was like 12 years old, being in Nebraska and going to the magic show, and it's the local Johnny Carson, this the guy that's on the radio, and getting to meet Carson from that young age, and Carson then during the show introducing the 12-year-old Cavett and his two magician friends in the audience, and Cavett in his diary writing, "This was the greatest day of my life. I met Johnny Carson."
And I love when Carson would tease Cavett because he had his start and stops over his great talk show career himself.
Yeah.
And that great line of, well, I guess it's Armed Forces Radio for you now, Richard, isn't that right? And I love that he called him Richard,
Yeah, he did. No, there's definitely something paternal, something avuncular,
Yeah.
about it. And yeah, Cavett was just a really good recall and was always wonderful on the show. One of the big treats that I got to do, and I know you're going to be talking with him sometime soon, is Dan Pasternak. And for my 100th episode, I think it was the 100th episode of the Carson podcast, we had Dick Cavett back, and after we were taping, we were showing him kinescopes of when he was on with Carson in like 1965, 66. And Cavett just was like, couldn't believe it. I showed him guest hosting for Johnny, and Cavett, I think he called his assistant and was like, cancel everything for the rest of the night, and just stayed with us for hours. But it was just to watch his face watching these old clips that we were able to find was unbelievable.
The archive is really interesting. And Jeff Zossig is, I know, the head of, if it's
That's
still
right.
called Carson Productions and stuff. And I know too, from a broadcast standpoint, you can get access. But it's a shame that whatever does survive isn't more available to the public. Have you talked to
I
Jeff about that at all?
I love Jeff has been really nice to me and he's helped me.
Yeah.
The thing with Carson Entertainment Group, it's really, really hard to license to do all the clearances necessary to broadcast some of the clips. The first thing that you'll notice on Antenna TV or some of the others when they do the episodes is the first thing they go over the musical guest. You're not going to see that. It's the most expensive residuals, and unfortunately, they have decided that they can't do that. So I know that in the last like 6 months or 7 months, I believe they cleared 100 more shows to
Oh,
show.
wow.
So I mean, I've asked Jeff why they can't do anything with the guest host collection, because like to me that's one of the most fascinating things, because you have everyone from Kirk Douglas to Orson Welles to Arnold Palmer to Joe Namath
The
guest hosting the
Muppets.
show.
The
Yeah.
Muppets, for Christ's
No,
sake.
you have
Yeah,
yeah,
I
that was
watched
Peter,
that live, man, or, at home.
yeah.
But,
That
I
was
remember
Peter
that.
LaSalle's idea. Peter LaSalle said, I want Kermit, and NBC thought it would be too complicated, and Peter really championed it. And yeah, it was one of those things when people tuned in. It could be Diana Ross guest hosting The Tonight Show or Roy Clark, but it was really fun for, I think, America just to tune in and see who that would be. I mean, they always wanted Johnny, but it was definitely interesting, though, the number of people that you would not be expecting. You wouldn't expect like a Lauren Green from Bonanza to host The Tonight Show. So
I didn't remember that. I do remember a couple good Steve Martin hosting moments, which was really cool to see. That
yes.
again, maybe not 5 days a week forever, but to pop in and actually be as effective as he was. I was pretty impressed.
Yeah, he was phenomenal. Some people really could do it. There were other comedians like Charles Nelson Riley that had a really tough time with it. But then there were people like the best. I think probably some of the best were like McLean Stevenson, Richard Dawson was really good at it. Yeah, it was definitely a skill set that not everyone could do.
Cosby was hit and miss, and I remember a couple bomb nights. I remember one night, and Mark, again, I'm so glad that you're
Yeah,
researching the guests, because it is interesting in
sure.
contrast, and we get a sense of it in the book as well.
Yeah.
But I remember one night where Cosby's monologue really bombed, and he said, "Now at the end here, they're gonna flash the applause sign. I don't want you to applaud. Let's go right to a commercial." And literally, his last words were, "Let's show that something wrong happened," and they faded out and went into the commercial. And I have that kind of didactic
Cosby
memory.
was
You know,
really tough because Peter LaSalle told me that you never knew with Cosby because he didn't do any preparation or very little. He was either brilliant or he bombed, and you never know what it was going to be. So,
yeah.
I mean, if he was doing that when he was guest hosting, if he didn't do well, maybe sometimes it only made Johnny look good. But there were like 6 or 7 years where Johnny didn't put Cosby on just because he wouldn't prepare and you never knew what you were going to get. But once Cosby kind of like became the face of the network, they started putting him on. But even Cosby's final appearance on Carson, I think that was like, yeah, it was the last one. It would have been probably May or April of '92. Johnny had asked Bill Cosby to do his Noah routine from stand up, and Cosby does maybe 10 or 15 seconds of it, something like that. And it's like, I forget the rest. And Johnny's like, you could have prepared. And again,
Wow.
Cosby does not prepare. So very little prep. So yeah, you could tell Carson wasn't happy about that. But it's, at that point, I mean, Cosby was, yeah, the face of the network and was kind of TV royalty. So
One of the tragedies of that you cover in your book is Freddie
yeah,
Prinze, Freddie Prinze
yeah,
Sr.,
mhm,
who was a great comic. I had
yeah,
the album and everything, and you'll forgive
yeah.
me, but Tony Orlando came to our sports station, and we had the album of Looking Good, his stand up. It was recorded in Chicago, actually. It was
Yeah.
on Columbia, and he's like, "Can I have this?" And we gave it to him, and he was so thrilled. And he told us about that night that he hosted the Tonight Show, and he's like, he was like 10 years old. He was like an older brother to Prince, the way Carson was to Cabot. And he's like, "Hey man, you're 20 or whatever, or 19." And he's like, "Can you handle it?" He's like, "I got this. Don't worry about it." And to as a safety, Bob Hope was one of the guests along with Tony. And I guess at one point, this is Tony's story, but he's like,
Yeah.
"How old is this kid?" And he's like 19. He's like, "God damn, this is a talented kid." So what did you
Yeah.
get? Did you ever talk to Tony about it?
I met him once, but I never got to talk to him about it. I would have loved it. Yeah, the whole Freddie Prince thing, I thought it was important in the book to kind of put things that people believe that were just not true. Like Freddie Prince's rise was unbelievable, but he did not get a sitcom overnight, and NBC did not even want him. So he went on the Jack Parr Sunday show, did very well. He sent that tape into Carson's talent coordinator, and then a few months later, Freddie Prinze made his debut on Carson. And it was like a week or two later, it was the producer of Chico and the Man had heard
James
about
Tomac.
Freddie Prinze. Yeah, yeah, saw the videotape and was like, oh my goodness, this guy is amazing. Let's audition him. And then NBC didn't want him. I mean, he was completely untested. He was new, and he really fought for him. And everything did happen quickly. Within 6 months, Chico and the Man premieres, and it's the number one show, or like in the top three.
Yep.
So it happened very quickly, but the whole thing where people are like overnight, it's a good story for people to think that and to say it, but I want to kind of debunk that type of thing because that did not happen.
True, but as far as comedians going on
Yeah.
the Tonight Show, as you well document from dozens, if not hundreds, that it really was life changing. And again, we got to remember it was
It
that
was.
3 channel or 5 channel world that
It,
even you and I grew up in, as
it
far as the
was.
80s and things.
There were only 15 people, to my knowledge, that were called over in 30 years to the couch. So, yeah, I mean, there were definitely people that were not called over, like Roseanne, that got sitcoms. I mean, I look at 1991, it was Carson's last year, and it was within like 3 weeks, it was an unknown Drew Carey, Ray Romano, and George Lopez, and they all wound up with their own sitcoms. So it was one of those things you never knew. I mean, Seinfeld, I don't think was called over for 4 or 5 times. It took him a while to get called over. I just would keep doing stand up. So you just never knew. I mean, there are people that I talked to at the Tonight Show to this day that still believe the only reason Freddie Prince was called over is because Sammy Davis was laughing so loud and the audience saw Sammy laughing and they ended up kind of like infectious laughter. But I thought Freddie Prince was great. And I mean, his debut was as strong as anybody's, I think.
Well, again, your extensive research for not having been able to, because you were too young to go
Yeah,
see Carson in
sure.
Burbank,
Mm.
dude. And I'm 43 years ago. How you doing, everybody?
I
I
can't
was,
believe that.
I
Yeah.
was 17 years old or 18,
Sure.
and I saw the
Yeah.
show. I told you, and
Yeah. It's
you
amazing.
mentioned Seinfeld. That's the reason why I bring it up. I kind of think his segment might have been taped, and he wasn't actually physically there because it was
Wow.
Victoria Principal and Charles Grodin. And I
Mhm.
think Grodin, in his usual fantastic way on the couch, would just improv that
Yeah.
wonderful animosity towards Carson, which was, and he
Sure.
carried on with Letterman and others and stuff.
That's true.
But yeah, but again, but it was great to watch everything that happened. And like you said, the fact that no, if anything, Johnny was smoking between
That's
segments.
right.
and stuff, and not talking to the other people and stuff,
Mm.
and that canned open that McMahon would perform, and again, I
Mhm.
saw it live. Well, it was new to
Yeah.
me, whatever. But just and then Doc would do the band would do
Yeah.
this great jazz piece and stuff. It was so
I
great.
love
I'm
that
I'm really
that
glad
you're
that I
there.
got to experience it.
Oh, it's unbelievable. No, the power of that show and just to be there live. And Ed McMahon basically did the same type of warm up for 30 years and it worked. Jeff Sotzig said it was so bad it was good. And yeah, people were really excited for Ed to be there. And Ed, at least like the last bunches of years, would always say in the warm up, when Johnny was going to be there that night, and he's like, "And I have good news for you. The person whose name appears in the title of the show is actually going to host his own show." Johnny would kind of roll his eyes back, but he knew that, that it was kind of true at that point, 3 days a week.
Yeah. Well, also that relationship is fascinating, and
I agree.
how I think it was closer in New York than
Yeah,
it
that's
was
true.
in LA. And I
Hmm.
mean, and of course, your book is great because it really is warts and all. I mean, you
Oh,
really do talk
yeah.
about Johnny's demons. He had a drinking issue. He
Hmm.
smoking obviously and emphysema cost him his life. But thank God Ed was around a lot of times in New York when it was one drink too many.
Ed did save him. The thing that I did feel good about with a lot of the things that I did bring up that maybe are not pleasant with Carson is he would talk about this on the Tonight Show as his struggle. So it wasn't a secret. Like he would talk about that he was not a good drinker, that he would, instead of being like some people when they drink get very loving, Carson said he would want to fight everybody. He said it was just one more drink than I should have had. And he said he turned into Attila the Hun. He talked about his problems with being overly competitive. And he would talk like about Ed, like saving him a couple times back in New York just to make sure that he would get home. But yeah, they needed each other. They were so good together in their chemistry. I mean, there were a couple of times McMahon overstepped his bounds and got reprimanded, but for the most part, they started out as really close friends. I know that like Johnny took the train from New York down to Pennsylvania with Ed a couple times when he was having marital problems. But by the time they got to New York, I think that the relationship had run its course. So they'd get together for anniversaries, usually the anniversary of Who Do You Trust and maybe birthday. So they'd get together a couple times a year, but they had different social circles.
Yeah.
I think like Ed would have really have liked to have been closer to Johnny, but it's what it is. And Ed, before every episode, would go into Johnny's dressing room for a minute or two and they would chat. So they had a relationship. It kind of became something a little bit different over
Yeah,
time.
a little more distant or whatever as the
Yeah.
years went. Well, and
Yeah.
Johnny, because of his wives, apparently, found himself in a strata of celebrity that he kind of leapt. And I mean, the wives are fascinating, all of them. And
Yeah.
I want to ask about
Sure.
Jody, the first
Sure.
wife. I Did you ever have an opportunity, or had she passed before you started doing your stuff?
To my knowledge, she's still alive. I've never seen an obit. I was doing research online, and to my knowledge, she's still around. She'd be
Wow,
99 or 100. I
wow.
never talked to her. I talked to wife number two briefly on the phone, talked to wife three, and we emailed back and forth. But yeah, the wives were very interesting. I mean, wife number two, especially Joanne, was the architect of the Tonight Show. I mean, Johnny turned it down. She's the one that told him you were going to do this. That gave him the confidence to do it. She's the one that brought in Fred DeCordova. I mean, she was firing and hiring people. Peter Lasalle told me nobody knew how powerful Joanne was behind the scenes. Johnny had no idea. I mean, Joanne's the one that contacted NBC without Johnny's knowledge and said, "Come to the Friars roast of Gary Moore. My husband Johnny is going to be performing," and set the whole thing in motion. I mean, she was really dynamic. I mean, she was a cheerleader. She was in the front row for months when Johnny was started the Tonight Show. She was the one also that said when he was getting all this big money offers to play Vegas, he was too nervous to do it and he didn't have an act. And she's like, "We're going to do this together." In 1964, they worked on the act together, and it broke Judy Garland's attendance record. I mean, it was unbelievable, but. I don't think Joanne personally gets enough credit for the Tonight Show. I don't think there's any way it would have happened without her.
And Joanna, wife
Yeah,
three. Well, first of all, and I'm so glad you cover this because I had
yeah,
heard about
mhm.
infidelity. Joanne
Sure.
was with another guy, and Johnny
Yeah,
bust in, and I mean this
hmm
crazy story. Read the book,
yeah,
you will be amazed. at this story. It's one of the great stories. But then, so just as Joanne was so important at getting him the Tonight Show, it seemed like Joanna was the connection to the Gregory Pecks and
Yeah.
the Hollywood world of celebrity.
It was definitely more social. Like Carson, I can't imagine him ever going to, really go into as many parties. I mean, he would just kind of retreat in the corner and do magic tricks and just be, it was really tough, but she loved being social. He was an introvert. She was more of an extrovert. She would do a lot of charity work, and Carson would have to entertain and do things. And I think there were good things about that. Like the one thing that he did love, and it took a little bit of convincing was going over to Europe, and Johnny fell in love with it. I mean, it was he liked it to an extent. He could walk around anonymous. People weren't watching the show. Once he started hosting the Oscars and it went global, it was a little different. But he loved being able to walk around unbothered, and he would be hanging out in France with Roger Moore. He'd be going to parties with Michael Caine in England. He loved Wimbledon. So he was up and about, and he really that became an annual thing, almost annual, and he just loved his tennis. He loved going to the jazz festival, Buddy Rich and Nice. So that was definitely Joanna's influence.
And again, boy, I'm glad you mentioned jazz because, amateur drummer. I don't know if you ever drummed professionally, but certainly was incredible. I remember that 60 Minutes episode where we see him.
That's
I
right.
remember seeing him and Buddy Rich screwing around on the Tonight Show on
Mhm.
clips, and Ed O'Shaughnessy, his own Tonight Show drummer and everything. But yeah, and again, we're rock and roll kids, but it was, it's interesting. I had forgotten, and you document.
Okay.
I have to say, I always was under the assumption that there weren't a lot of top 40 performers on the Tonight Show, and there were for a time. Maybe as I got older, it was less and less. Describe that for me.
A lot of it was it depended. Like there were like the Beach Boys. There were top 40 people. A lot of the more hard rock would have been with guest hosts, like a Jimi Hendrix would have been with a guest host. I think Flip Wilson.
Oh,
It really depended. Like Johnny really loved the big band stuff, but
yeah.
he would occasionally he would put just as like a one-off, like someone like an Alice Cooper or ZZ Top made their network television debut, and that was like a big thing for ZZ Top. It sold like
Sure.
30 million records.
And, Johnny hosted that one you're saying. I
Yes,
didn't
and he
see
did
that
it
one.
on
Wow.
purpose just for the visual, so he could have the beard, the ZZ Top beard.
Sure.
So once in a while they would go that route. But yeah, for the most part, it was Tony Bennett, Joe Williams. That
Yeah.
was his extent. I mean, he really did like put in occasionally like somebody like a James Brown or Tina Turner and Ike Turner, but he definitely believed people are going to bed at 11:30. They don't want really exciting music. So that's why I talk
Makes
about it in
sense.
the book. Billy Preston gets the standing ovation, and people are on their feet for him as he's playing his two songs. And anywhere else, that would be a coup. And they're like, we want him back next week. But Johnny was upset because he's like, the people at home that are trying to go to sleep are now not going to be able to go to sleep. And Preston was never allowed back on with Johnny. He was allowed to do with guest host, but Johnny firmly believed that you just can't do that.
It is interesting the various celebrities that, for whatever reason, I mean, he had his feuds and some self-imposed, like the Wayne Newton thing. And again, the great
Oh
thing that you
gosh,
covered. Yeah,
yeah.
and it's fascinating. The Joan Rivers thing. My God, you do such a great job, and
Thanks.
I'm fascinated by her trajectory, and I mean, she did rightfully say at least that she did owe it all to Carson. Carson's the one that really pulled her out of obscurity, and just that turn from the Fox years till the end, and
Yeah,
that
because
she never
yeah.
she never let go.
It's tough. I mean, she would definitely compliment Carson on being the greatest straight man ever in her career. And I mean, she had gone on Jack Parr. It did nothing for her career. She goes on, and I think it was 65 with Carson. And, very quickly, the newspaper columnist, Walter Winchell, they're all like, the new Carol Burnett. And she's heralded and was back with Carson within like a week or two. And her life changed, and it was unbelievable. And Johnny made her the permanent guest host, the first person ever to be the permanent guest host. And she had, within a year, she broke Frank Sinatra's record with getting paid in Vegas, Atlantic City. It was like residency. She set a record, and that's only because she was permanent guest host. I mean, that visibility. The same thing happened when Leno took over for permanent. Your money goes up, skyrockets with that visibility. And famously, she got her own show on Fox and didn't tell Johnny. Barry Diller told me to my face in New York. He said, I told Joan you owe it to Johnny to tell him you were going to go opposite. Barry Diller was in a poker game with Johnny and they were friends. And Miss Rivers told Barry Diller and other people, I can't tell Johnny there are going to be unforeseen circumstances. And Rivers' own friends said, Johnny's going to be furious with you. You need to tell him. And obviously she didn't. Johnny found out from NBC president Brandon Tartikoff. And that was just devastating. Carson couldn't even believe that. But then when Joan tried to take Johnny's producer, Peter LaSalle, every talent coordinator, all five were offered double their salary. Yeah, trying to poach the staff. Johnny just thought that was just terrible and just never really got over it. And yeah.
What a coup you had, and the few that have talked to Peter LaSalle at length. Because that guy, even before, as you know, even before Carson, walking broadcast history with Arthur Godfrey, the same with DeCordova, walking broadcast history with Burns and Allen and Jack Benny.
Yeah, it's really true. And it's like tough with Peter because him and Joan Rivers, like their families would go on vacation together. And it was just, I don't know what Miss Rivers was thinking. Like, well, I do know what I think she was thinking was that she was trying to be subservient to her husband, Edgar Rosenberg, who wanted to be a big time producer. And I think he was just not good for her for many reasons that the friends have said professionally. And I think that was a big reason.
Yeah, tragically
I think that's
himself.
a big reason.
What a pall over not only obviously Joan, but poor Melissa as well.
It's unbelievable. And then Miss Rivers found out she was in millions in debt. And just the fact that she was able to reinvent herself and be that resilient, unbelievable comedy icon for sure. But the way that she would tell the story about Johnny, it was just ridiculous, though, in my opinion. She would just say, I couldn't tell Johnny. You could have told Johnny. And then she said, like, the first call I made was to Johnny. But yeah, after he found out, you knew he found out. So there was a lot more to it. And she doesn't like to talk about the fact she did admit that she did try to take Peter LaSalle, but she didn't like to kind of talk about that part. She left that part out that she tried to take the staff out with her.
It's been interesting hearing people talk to Leno as well. And I loved Leno's strategy, I guess, when, there were other candidates potentially to be the permanent guest host. And Brillstein, tell the story about how Brillstein's clients and the economics.
Jay talked to me for 50 minutes. I don't think he wanted to. He said he was going to talk to me for the podcast. He ghosted me. We talked on the phone. He's like, tell me about this. And he's like, when are you going to be in Los Angeles? And then he ghosted me. Rick Ludwin, vice president of NBC, said, Jay probably knows that you know too much and does not want your questions. So I sent him an email when I did this book, and I said, listen, Jim McCauley, talent booker for The Tonight Show, for the comedians, he wrote this story that you yelled at him. If you want to give me your version, here's my phone number. Within an hour, Jay Leno's on the phone with Mark Malkoff. He calls me, and he gave me 50 minutes, and I really, really do appreciate it. But I asked him some tough questions. I thought he was fair, and when he wasn't, I kind of like gently kind of put what I thought was the truth. But yeah, he was telling me, and it makes sense. Johnny had ownership of The Tonight Show from 1980, I think 1980 on. It was coming out of his paycheck, and the Brillstein big clients, you had people, like Gary Shandling was one of them, and you had a bunch. And Bernie told Jay, I can get you whatever, 20,000 a week or something like that. And Jay was smart. You do it for scale. I think he did it for $512 per show. Because if you do that for scale, number one, you're going to get the gig. Number two, your money in Vegas and all around the country is going to skyrocket. And Jay just played the long-term game. I mean, Helen Kushnick, his manager, they were just really smart. And not only did they do that in terms of laying the foundation for Jay to get the Tonight Show, but she had him go to all the NBC affiliates and be politicking around, where Dave Letterman thought, if you do a good job, they're going to just give me the show. It's okay that I make fun of NBC execs and call them pinheads. I can make fun of GE. And he really thought that they were going to still give him the show just out of merit. And that was not the case at all. Unfortunately, I mean, Johnny would have preferred Dave, but had zero say, and it would make sense that NBC would want somebody a lot easier to deal with, and that's what happened.
Well, and again, just like people should love Johnny Carson and get the Carson story, right next to it on their bookshelf should be The Late Shift that Bill Carter wrote.
Oh, yeah.
Really documenting all that. And man, I want to talk to you about that great panel that you did with Bill and John from the Late Nighter channel. about the future of
sure.
late night before we wrap up. But
Yeah.
mentioning Letterman, I'm
Yeah.
fascinated that,
Hmm.
and again, we don't know because we don't get to see the kinescopes. But back in the '60s,
Yeah.
Johnny was running around doing out of studio sketches at the same level that Dave was, wouldn't you say?
He was like on the Friday before he took over on October 1st, 1962. That Monday, he was at the Yankee Stadium, throwing pitches to Mickey Mantle and Roger Maris, and then a couple of years later, he's with the New York Jets and he's playing at the Polo Grounds. He was skydiving, he was hot air ballooning, he was all over the place. He was at Indianapolis Motor Speedway with Mario Andretti and Parnelli Jones, going hundreds of miles. I don't know how, like over 100 miles an hour.
Yeah.
So yeah, Johnny was it was definitely a different type of show. And then Craig Tennis, who was one of the talent coordinators, would get Johnny to do all these stunts that no other host would do. You would see it in Burbank. Some of the tape near the early of Burbank where Johnny would fall like 20 or 30 feet onto a mat or something like
Oh,
things
what, like Letterman?
things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was definitely one of those things where Johnny back in the day, yeah, was active like that. And like Johnny was like the first one when he confronted Don Rickles about the broken cigarette box for him to interrupt a live broadcast. To my knowledge, I don't think that had ever been done at late night. And Dave Letterman took that Rickles thing and made it a staple. He would interrupt the news
Live
and
at
other
five.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah, which was great, fun TV. But yeah, there were a bunch of things that Johnny did first, like new products, and Johnny did a version of jaywalking that Jay ended up doing. And Johnny was such a polite guy. He's like, now we're not making fun of these people. Just whereas Jay, the whole thing, his whole humor was like, these people are stupid,
Yeah.
punchline. But Johnny was very over explained, like we're not making fun of them. But yeah, they did a
Well, again,
version of it.
he was diplomatic with the common man and really made you feel whether you were sitting on the couch or in Stump the Band or whatever that he really gave a damn for those
He
few minutes he was talking to people.
he respected his audience so much that he would not do something to make somebody look bad. Like whenever he had the quote civilians on, the people that weren't famous that had
Yeah.
weird hobbies or things,
Potato chip
he never
lady,
made
whatever.
fun of them. Exactly. He never made fun of them. When Merv Griffin made fun of Tiny Tim, the audience turned on him. Like you can't Johnny wouldn't make fun of them. He respected the audience, he respected his guests. He wouldn't even have like somebody like Paul Rubens, Pee Wee Herman, or Gilbert Godfrey. He wouldn't have on somebody that was in character if the audience couldn't tell if they were in character or not. Like somebody like Super Dave Osborne, Bob Einstein was so obvious that was
Yeah.
fine for Carson.
Yeah.
Someone like Father Guido Sarducci, Don Novello, that was okay. It was so obvious that this is a bit. But
Sure.
if the lines were kind of blurred, Carson just was like, I don't want to do that to my audience. Like Andy Kaufman, he did put on 3 times, but it was after the audience just kind of knew that this was a guy that was doing a bit. So, but if there was any question about it, Carson was like, I respect my audience. I'm not going to do that to them.
All right, I got to take a quick tangent in modern days
Yeah.
because I this is what drives me nuts about a Larry
Okay.
the Cable Guy. And again, everyone has
Yeah.
their fans, that's fine. But the
Yeah.
guy that drives me nuts as a late night host,
Mhm.
that I don't know if you're aware of that wrestling term kayfabe, and
Yeah.
essentially
Oh,
that
I know
is
kayfabe very
okay.
well. Oh,
All right.
yeah.
For the
Yeah.
audience, and I'm assuming most of my audience knows, but in case you don't, that's when the wrestler is in the camera. I'm gonna get you Saturday. I'm gonna rip you apart, and of course it's full theatrics. Fine,
Yeah.
we get that. That's wrestling. What drives me nuts about Greg Gutfeld is he did a New York Times podcast interview recently, half kayfabe, half regular, and it's like, dude,
Oh, wow.
can we? It'd be nice to just see you normal and not just being a little too. I mean, and he was just swiping at all
That's
the
interesting.
political left talk hosts and stuff, and it bummed me out. And also, it is interesting from a societal standpoint that Gutfeld is having the success he has because truly, you had I guess Les Crane maybe in the '60s. I'm trying to think of and
Yeah.
more like Downey Jr., other people like that, but they weren't really
George
interview
Pine.
talk shows.
Yeah.
Joe Pine, attaboy. That yes, yes,
George
yes.
Pine. Yeah. Gutfeld does better in the numbers, but in terms of profitability, in terms of making money, at the metrics, that's not how it works anymore. In terms of his audience is much older, and just the money is not coming in
From an advertising
to my
standpoint?
knowledge.
From an
I don't
advertising
think
standpoint?
so. Yeah,
Okay.
I think the other shows are probably making, even though Colbert Show is going away.
Hmm.
I believe that the Nielsen's definitely they play some into it and stuff. But Gutfeld has been very successful with his audience. I truly just have been busy for 4 years and haven't watched much of anything. But
Oh, okay.
that's really interesting that he is like the kayfabe thing because I used to go when I was a kid to wrestling and this kayfabe was still very very much there and I loved
Sure.
that
Oh,
whole
sure.
theatric stuff and that
Well, it's a
doesn't really
performance.
exist anywhere anymore. I mean, but that was the ultimate theater was, and I couldn't tell if someone like Jack Parr if that was kayfabe if he that was a character
Interesting.
with the whole weeping and controversy, but people that I talked to that knew him said he was exactly like that, and that was one of the reasons that he had to quit. He just for his health he couldn't take putting himself through that much pressure, and that he would manufacture controversy a little bit like professional wrestling here and there, but that person was Jack. And I just wasn't really sure completely if that was him or not. And I thought that was interesting.
Do you think his like feud, his real famous feud was him and Sullivan? And
Oh gosh.
they really went back and forth. And I mean, because it did seem genuine. I don't know, man.
I think that there was a little bit, but I think Parr was a master at ratings and manipulating that stuff. I mean, I think the highest rated shows I could be off, or maybe when after the water closet joke. I
He
think
told a
maybe when
bathroom
Parr,
joke and referred to it as
yeah,
a water closet. The
and he
censors,
quit, and
well,
then he came
the
back.
censors are like, no, we can't allow that. And he's like, hey, if I can't say
Yeah.
something as innocent as that, goodbye. And he was gone for like a month or whatever, wasn't
And then he returns and he says, as I was saying, and
it?
that episode, I think maybe when he went to Cuba with
Castro.
Castro
Yeah.
and they were and he was supposed to be doing a live debate with Ed Sullivan that night, who did not show up because they couldn't agree on the debate rules. But those were I think the three highest rated pars. But that whole like the whole feuds and stuff to me. It really does seem like Parr was just a master manipulator with that with some of that. I mean, he had everyone from Jimmy Hoffa sued Parr at one point. I think I don't think Parr probably minded very much. Just like Johnny in his last year when Mr. Blackwell sued him because Johnny did some joke that about Mr. Blackwell calling Mother Teresa like her fashion like a nun no or something, and Johnny was delighted. And obviously, that suit was thrown out, but Johnny delighted in talking about it, and that Blackwell would even think that he could do litigation and win. So,
You document his final days so well. Not only final
oh,
days on
thanks.
the air, but all the years afterwards. I mean, he lived
Yeah,
another over 10 years. Was it like 13 or
yeah.
14 years?
It was like
Um,
13 years, something like that,
yeah,
maybe.
yeah, I thought so. I mean, again, I was at Sporting News
Yeah,
Radio when we got the word that he had passed, and
yeah,
we were all upset again because
yeah.
he was one of our idols, absolutely. But I didn't know. We didn't mention Alex, his fourth wife,
Yeah.
and granted, like you said, I guess the European trips or world trips started earlier than that. But my God, him going to Russia and him going
That's
to
right.
Africa with Jim
Yeah,
Fowler, the
yeah,
wildlife guy, which
yeah.
that
And
was so
yeah.
cool to hear that, like beyond the show where they clearly had
Yeah.
chemistry, that they were friends that way.
And it wasn't enough for Johnny to go to Russia. He has to have somebody come to his home for 4 months and teach him Russian. So he has somebody from Brext, this guy who was probably like, I can't believe I'm going to Johnny's Carson's home in Malibu and teaching him Russian. So Johnny could go and he learned Swahili where he could communicate with the Africans. And they couldn't believe that an American really took the time and they respected it. Johnny was just super curious like that. Like he was taking Spanish lessons in Vegas in between shows and just really, really curious. But yeah, Jim Fowler told me that the Africa changed Johnny. He just fell in love with that place. And I really kind of thought until I started doing the podcast and doing more research that the media kind of made Johnny out to be a recluse in retirement, and it wasn't true. He was out with his writers having lunches. He was at the office with friends. He definitely liked his alone time. He was an introvert. I'm an introvert. I like my alone time, but I still am around people all the time, and Johnny was. So I think that the whole about a recluse, like he didn't need the spotlight in terms of him going back to television. I think he definitely missed the monologue, but he retires from the Tonight Show May 22nd, 92, and for 2 solid years, he's on The Simpsons, the American Teacher Awards, Bob Hope's 90th birthday, Kennedy Center honors. He gets the Presidential Medal of Honor from George Herbert Walker Bush, and then goes on stage in May of 94, his last appearance, which was Dave Letterman at Television City, and he makes that cameo
The
with the
walk
top
on.
10 list.
Yeah.
And then Johnny's done. And it was one of those things, always waiting for him to come back and do something, but he just did not want to be Bob Hope or somebody that he thought stuck around too long. Johnny at this point had quit smoking and he had gained a little weight, and I think he just his appearance, there were a bunch of factors, but he would take the pitches and consider coming back, but he's like, you know what, I've done, I did it. Let the work speak for itself.
It's interesting. And also, I had no idea how many different shows that he executive produced beyond, Letterman, the NBC days. Carson owned the Letterman show as well. But I mean,
Yeah.
that Lonnie
Yeah.
Anderson, was it Lonnie Anderson and
Linda Carter. Yeah,
Yeah, Partners in
that's
Crime.
right.
And you
They
have
tried.
a great personal story that when
Yeah.
poor Anderson and everything faced some personal tragedy, that Johnny stepped in.
It was like that with so many people I talked to. Lonnie Anderson, yeah, told me not only like when she found out that her mom was dying, that Johnny is like, here's my plane, and was flying her to San Francisco to LA on the weekends. It was when Burt Reynolds, when so many of his friends abandoned him, when there were rumors that he had AIDS in the late 80s. And Lonnie Anderson said Johnny was always there for him during that time when a lot of people weren't.
Yeah.
And when they adopted their son Quentin, that
Yeah.
Johnny was there. And the people that I talked to that knew Johnny the most told me that the most important quality that Johnny demanded, but he would give, is loyalty. And if he was loyal to you, the people would say that he would do anything for you.
Well, and also, again, he really couldn't have a normal non-TV life because he was so in audiences' minds. So that's why
Yeah.
I absolutely respected the fact that he would just be very selective. And it's good to hear that he was going out and wasn't, J.D.
Yeah.
Salinger on the House on the Hill and everything, and just, or Charles Foster Kane at the end.
Yeah, no, he kept in touch with people from Nebraska. He kept in touch with his old radio and TV friends, and
Yeah.
was just out and about. He still was playing in his poker games up until I think like the last year of his life, writing jokes for Dave Letterman the last like 8 months or so of his life, and
Yeah.
being delighted when Dave would do his jokes. And Dave sometimes would do like the golf swing, an inside joke. Everybody at home would have no idea what's going on,
Yeah.
but yeah, it was really. I felt I really did want to chronicle Johnny's retirement in the last days, because there was just a really lot of questions on like on what exactly happened, and I pieced that together the best I could.
Alex wouldn't talk to you?
We went back and forth a little bit on email. She was very, very cordial and very nice. But no, that wasn't going to happen, and I figured it wouldn't happen. But yeah, she was helpful, like in certain things. Like I mean,
Okay.
I think the biggest thing that she was helpful is I think I'm the first person ever in the history of the media to spell her last name right. It's Mass, Mass. It's not Maas that everybody
Moss.
in the media calls. I emailed Alex and I'm like, my publisher's giving me a hard time because they're saying everyone else from like all the newspapers spell the name Maas, and I'm like, Alex, I did so much research and I'm almost positive that it's Mass, and she's like, laugh out loud, you're right. I guess her and Johnny thought it was hilarious that for 30 or 40 years that the media just would get that thing wrong, but I was happy that I was at least able to get that clarification. But I hope she's happy. I've never met her in person, but yeah, it was nice just to be cordial with her on some email exchanges.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't know if she'll ever reveal. I have a feeling she won't. I think she really
Probably
respected
not.
his privacy and their
I think
privacy.
it was tough initially when she found out that they were going to do the PBS American Masters, and then she saw it and loved it, and I think she
Oh, that's
changed
great.
her mind. I had heard Peter Jones did such an amazing job with that, but yeah, definitely the privacy gene. I mean, just the fact Johnny always didn't want a funeral. I mean, it was in his will, I think, up until from like the 60s or 70s, he was going to be cremated. They had a memorial for the close family on a boat, spreading the ashes. That was after he died, but nothing public. But that was very much like Johnny, want to go out very quiet.
Did you ever encounter the other biographers from Lemur to
Yeah.
Bushkin and the Bill Zemi, one of Chicago's very own.
Yeah, well, I did definitely talk to Bill Zeme on the phone, and we emailed, and he told me his book would never come out. His friends told me it would never come out, and then Bill passed away. And I get that Simon and Schuster wanted a return on their investment because they did pay him. I'm
Yeah,
guessing that's what it was. And they had a gentleman I've never met who I hear is very nice named Mike Thomas finish the book, and it got published. But Bill told me it was never going to, and I don't know if he would have liked it to be published or not,
interesting.
but I do get that the that Simon and Schuster yeah, that they
One.
wanted to put it out, and it did very well. So I talked to him, and Bill was great. Yeah, he was just so many health problems. And then Lawrence Lemer and I did some phone calls, and she was very helpful with the book. I really do think, in terms of Johnny's life in Nebraska, especially, I feel like Lemer probably did the best research I've ever seen in terms of
Okay.
that part of Johnny's life. I think that he did really well on that, and some of New York. I mean, so Lamer was very helpful. From the one thing I do can think that I think is in my book that he didn't really get is because Johnny was still alive and his friends were too loyal to talk. So it was hard to get any sense with the Lemur book, even though I'm not going to argue that it wasn't factual about the Johnny, that people loved him and he had friends and this warm, generous side of him. Like Lemur wrote that a little bit with one of his friends from Nebraska. But overall, when you don't have the people participating, giving those stories, it's just, I feel like there was something to Johnny's true personality, at least from the warm side, the gracious side, just was not represented in that book. That's just what I've
I
noticed.
I understand. I read Lemur's book. I read Bushkin's book.
Sure.
Zimmy's is on my reading list, and I didn't
Yeah.
realize all the controversy of releasing it that you've explained. Man, I got to tell you.
Yeah.
Go ahead if you have a comment on that.
Oh no, I have no idea. Bill was
Yeah.
great. I tried to get him on the Carson podcast. He was telling people months before he even passed away that he was going to go. I was the first podcast he was going to do, and then Gilbert Gottfried's was the second. And I'm such an awe of Bill, and he was wonderful to me. And I did read. Somebody gave me Henry Bushkin's book, and I read it. There are some things there that factually are just not true.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that is, but the stuff that there were certain things that just bothered me, like
Sure.
because for example, like Johnny and Bushkin were not had no relationship that I'm aware of after 1987 or 88, whenever it was. It was pretty much over, and then Bushkin makes the claim that Johnny died all alone, and it's like, no,
I
he
forgot that
died.
he
His
said that.
family was present.
Wow.
I
Yeah.
feel like he tried to make Johnny out to be like he was
Oh,
all alone and no friends. I'm like, he died with his wife was there, his two kids, surviving kids were there, and other people. He was with family, and he was very much just. It seemed to me tried to make it out to be like I was never Johnny's friend, and it's like his wife. Who passed away said that they were absolutely friends, or like at least as close as you could be with friends. And then Bushkin went on some podcast and said, Johnny and I were friends. And so I just feel like with that book, he was trying to make it out to be like that Johnny didn't have died alone and didn't have friends, and that wasn't the case. I
yeah. It
talked
was
to his
more.
friends.
I mean, it's got facts in it, but it is definitely more tabloidy than other biographies of other people. But yeah, I'm glad I read it. It is interesting to get you again because you've got the perspective, dude. You did so
Well,
much great
I
research.
tried.
Well, but
Yeah.
beyond the interviews, I mean, it seems like the library was your best friend, and you really researched all the
I
great
just
stuff
try
that
to
was
do
out
as
there.
much as I try to do as much as possible and put what, to my knowledge, what actually happened. The whole Frank Gifford thing is laughable.
Tell me
Everybody,
exactly.
everybody
We
that
should
was there.
contextually, supposedly, when they busted in, like that, maybe
Yeah,
Joanne was having the affair with Gifford. Is that what
sure.
was that? That was the,
Yeah,
Go
it
ahead.
was Peter Revson. Johnny had suspicion because Joanne had walked in on him on close to New Year's Eve. Johnny was with somebody from the Tonight Show in a compromising position. Yeah, so
Yeah.
Johnny was worried Joanne had been going on the weekends to get out of New York. She was feeling sick, and she would go to race. She was obsessed with race car driving, so she was going to the race car drives, and Johnny had a suspicion that Joanne was having an affair, and they hired somebody, and they tipped off or paid off a building manager, and he had a private detective track down this place where they thought this might be where she was held up, and they were able to get a key, and there was no break in. They were able to get the key. They open it up, And it was clear from the people that were there that it was absolutely Peter Revson, the race car driver that she was
Oh, he froze.
having in a
Okay.
relationship with. And it's very possible that there was a photo of her and Gifford because she did apparently have a relationship with Gifford pre-Carson. Before she met Carson, she did date Gifford. So that could have been there, but at that point she was it was a serious relationship with Refson. The Gifford thing, to me, I'm not even going to say anything else but that other than I do not believe that
And
was a thing, but it definitely would get more attention saying Frank Gifford than Peter Revson, the heir to Revlon, Playboy, but apparent heir. So,
do
but
you
I don't know.
do you mind if we keep going? We're at an hour now. I
Yeah,
hope it's
sure. Like
okay.
we can go a little
Oh,
bit. Yeah,
that's
sure.
really kind, Mark. Thank you, because
Thanks.
truly
Yeah,
I
of
have a
course.
million questions.
Sure, let's
The
do it.
also the Sonny Werblin relationship. By the way, Bombastic Bushkin, as Carson would refer to him, was Johnny's lawyer, and they did
Yeah,
pal around. So I'm sure there is
that's
like
right.
fun stories, but like Mark just said, there's stories that you can't know are true. But Sonny Werblin really opened the door in terms of endorsements. And again, as a little kid, we used to get the Sears catalog. We saw the Johnny
Yeah.
Carson suit line and everything, and that was a big deal.
Yeah, Werblin was another Joanne hire. They lived on the same floor at the UN Plaza building, and Johnny loved going to the Jets games with Joanne. And she remembers when the Jets won one of their championships, being in the locker room in Namath, pouring champagne over Johnny, and Johnny being like, "That's the first time I've ever seen you waste booze." And they palled around a lot, and
Yeah.
yeah, Werblin was really good with getting Johnny more control of the Tonight Show, and was very good with the clothing line was the thing that really did well. There were a lot of other things that they tried that did not go well with
No.
restaurant franchising and things that just didn't go well. And they, at one point, were going to be thinking about doing producing movies and just doing some stage and TV. Johnny was not great at that stuff, and yet didn't have a lot of interest in it. Like Carson Productions was kind of hands off on it. So, but definitely Werblin was big because at this point the tax Johnny was paying in like for the tax was like 90, he was being taxed like 90% or something ridiculous. I don't know what it was back then, but it's because Johnny was like, really was like, I'm going to be as honest as I can. Whereas like some other people would get an
The
accountant
tech
to kind of,
shelters. Yeah, all the
yeah.
different
So,
dodges and
so
stuff. Yeah, man.
Werblin saved Johnny a lot of money and turned him into a corporation where Johnny was paying so much in taxes. So, that did change him a lot, Werblin, and got him into horses for a while. He was into horse racing for a while, and they'd go to the races. So, yeah.
I didn't know until your book that Carson Productions was behind the Big Chill.
They were. That was the big success. That and Amen were the two big
The
successes.
TV show with Sherman
Yeah,
Hemsley after the Jeffersons.
yeah.
Sure.
I do want to point out there is this. I believe a myth that is not true that Johnny didn't put or like to put female comedian stand-ups on the show. The only female comedian or the only comedian that got a development deal with Carson Productions was Maureen Murphy, who was an Australian comedian who went on the show something like 12 times. She was based in Los Angeles, but I mean, I talked to so many people, women that did stand up on the show. As Ellen DeGeneres said back then, there just weren't many women stand ups, period.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there were, to me, it's hard to name that many names that didn't get to do Carson's show.
Was
And I talked to so
Boozler?
many of them.
Was there an issue
Yeah.
with him and Elaine Boozler, or did she do the show?
Elaine did not want to talk to me. She said, "You do not want to know what I have to say." But Helen Reddy put Elaine Boozler on the Tonight Show's guest host, and she did well. And then Johnny put her on, and I don't want to get into any specifics other than somebody that knows Elaine very well told me that Elaine was told not to do a joke and she did it. And I watched the videotape and I think I know what the joke was and was told not to do it. And she did. And Johnny was furious and never had her on again. That is according to somebody that knows her that told me. And I did watch and I'm like, I don't think she would be allowed to do that. So
Interesting.
if somebody did that, like Brad Garrett did a joke that Carson thought was inappropriate, you were not going to do the show anymore with Johnny. And, yeah, Miss Boozler, very talented. I think she just fit
Yeah.
very much with David Letterman, and she did had a great ride over there. It would have been great if she got more Carson bookings, but I definitely think doing a joke, if that is true that she was not supposed to do, it was just, yeah, she
Sure.
never recovered, I guess, from that.
But like, we already mentioned
Carson.
Roseanne, of course, and DeGeneres, and Rita
Yeah.
Rudner. I remember being on, and I thought she was on with Johnny
Carol
for
Leifer, Kathy
Leifer.
Ladman, Jan Karam,
Yeah.
Carol Siskin. Yeah, there are a bunch of wonderful stand-ups that were on. Victoria Jackson said that Saturday Night Live, she got SNL through Carson. They looked at one of her tapes and that really
Sure.
helped. So
Not to
I
mention
really,
Joan, of course, who we started with, for God's
sure.
sake, you know.
Sure. I mean, if somebody was funny, that was the prerequisite. I mean,
Yeah.
the first woman that they called over was Liz Torres in New York, was the first female comic called over to the couch. And if somebody was funny, he was going to put them on, and that's what it seemed like, at least
Well, and
to
Liz
me.
had transitioned by the time I was aware of her in the 70s as a full-on actress. And I had no
Yeah.
idea that she was a stand-up. But again, that was a great revelation from your book.
Yeah, she
How,
was at the Improv a lot. She was great. I mean, Johnny would have had Bette Midler on all the time, and she did a lot of appearances the first few years, and then it became hard to get her. And
well, yeah.
they tried to get her. They eventually got her to be the final guest, but even like leading up, they couldn't secure her. She was basically, her friends say that she says no to everything, or it's just you have to keep asking and asking, and maybe eventually she'll relent. But she didn't even want to sing One for My Baby, according to Mark Shaman. He had to really talk her into it. She's like, I can't hit those high notes, and he had to talk her into it. And obviously it was TV history, and she won an Emmy. So
You
yeah,
document that those last two shows, the last show with guests like
yeah,
Robin Williams and Bette Midler, the final show where it's
yeah,
just Johnny and Clips and Ed and
yeah.
Doc. And again, man, the world really did stop for those two shows.
It was really hard. I remember watching both of those shows, knowing that this guy was going to go away. I remember as a teenager just recognizing the significance of just watching that show from even when I was younger, that this thing was going away, and it was monumentous. It was really, really tough when Johnny said goodbye and it faded to the credits, and you're like, this is it. I didn't think I'd ever see that guy again. It was nice. He made some cameos and we did that Letterman thing 2 years later. It was great, and held off that maybe this guy was going to come back to us maybe one more time, and it wasn't meant to be. But yeah, to turn in terms of TV history, that penultimate show with Bette Midler and Robin Williams, it was the hardest thing for Carson to be like, I have to follow this. Like Peter Lassell and Johnny were like, this should have been the last show. We have to do another show, and a lot of people in the public still believe that was the last show, the one with Bette and Robin. And the next morning, Johnny had been up since 3:30 a.m. He couldn't sleep. He was so wound up from the night before because he had said nothing ever that magical and had ever happened into TV. He's never had anything like that happen with the moment. And Robin Williams called him that morning in tears, was crying, so emotional. It meant so much to him that he could be on that show. And then Johnny, just went over to NBC Burbank for that final taping and with a legal pad and was writing out what he was going to say, and he wrote like 90% of his opening remarks. He sat down on a bench. It wasn't a traditional monologue. There were still jokes, but most of that was him. And yeah, it was, I think the way that he went out was so classy. And then he takes the helicopter for the first time back to Malibu to make sure that he's there to greet his staff that are all going to be going to his home for the final after party. But yeah, that staff, I mean, oh my goodness, hearing their stories and how much Carson meant to them in that show, that was probably some of my favorite episodes.
Again, these incredible stories, and people
Yeah,
don't realize the value of what they call in the Hollywood movie thing, the below the line credits. And they're
sure.
the ones that really have the amazing stories. And again, so well
Yeah,
documented on both your podcast and Love Johnny Carson, your book. It's excellent,
I
man.
appreciate that.
Absolutely. And shame on me, man, because I should have brought this up earlier. Your own involvement in late night. You were a writer for Colbert.
I was not. That's so
Oh,
nice that you
oh,
say
is
that.
that
I was
forgive
the
me. Correct the record.
I was the audience coordinator. I was in charge of 107 people that came to this show.
Oh,
That I
okay.
had to make sure that they had pulses, that they could laugh, and I would talk to them before the
So
show
you
and
did
get
warm
in.
ups.
I would be the pre-warm up to the warm up, and I
Okay.
had no creativity involvement whatsoever. I've
Okay.
been in TV interviews where people have credited me as as a Colbert writer. I never wrote for
No.
the show. I was there. I had a day job at Dave Letterman's CBS show for 11 months and 15 days as well. I was not a writer, but it was great just to be in those spaces and
Yeah.
to witness that and to have someone like, Mike Wallace come over to Colbert, and I could talk to him about interviewing Johnny Carson with him. So like somebody like Ted Koppel would come over. We could talk about Carson or Dave Letterman, and people were always very, very kind with their time to open up and to have those conversations.
Well, you have been creative beyond the Carson podcast and the late night or channel stuff you do. Forgive me, your specific show is Inside Late Night. Is that what it is?
Yeah, Inside Late Night's been fun. We talked to a lot of people from Saturday Night Live, Letterman, Conan, just hearing the stories about working behind the scenes. Try to get as many kind of like surreal Larry Sanders story type moments that are kind of unbelievable but true things about late night. So, but yeah, it's definitely been fun to get those stories. And late nighters just done such a good job with late night current and past. And yeah, it's an honor to be working with them.
Yeah, forgive me, John's last name, Canadian guy. What's his last name? The guy, the main guy. Do you remember his name? It's okay if you don't. Shame
Oh,
on both of us. Starts with
John.
an S. Starts with an S.
Oh, John Schneider.
John Schneider.
John
thank
Schneider.
you.
Yes. Yes. John Schneider, and then you have Dan Pasternak and Jed Rosenzweig. We did the Carson 100. There were the 100. I think we said greatest moments or moments that we thought stuck out. So that was really fun that we put together
On the blog. Yeah, on the blog.
Yeah, so
everybody.
we
You can
did
find
that. But
list.
yeah, John's great. I think Bill Carter, John Schneider, and I are gonna be doing another one of those round tables and just kind of like talking about the state of late night and what's gonna happen and what we foresee. So we'll see.
Well, give me your thoughts, man, because again,
Okay.
I'm a 30 years in
Sure.
Chicago broadcasting, another 5
Sure.
in small markets and
Yeah.
stuff. I'm a broadcast nerd, and I really am like, what is going to happen now? Because things have,
Yeah.
I mean, obviously Colbert is counting down the days, and
Sure.
we'll see. It's great that Fallon re-upped, but the fact that it's only a year says a lot to me. That I almost wonder if it's a let's give him a graceful exit kind of thing.
If you've noticed, Jimmy Fallon and Kimmel both are
Did I say
hosting
Fallon? I
other
meant
shows.
Kimmel. I meant Kimmel, but go
Oh,
ahead.
okay, yeah. Kimmel and Fallon are both hosting other shows in the network, and I don't know if that's part of their deal to keep doing their show or what, but it does seem like the current model is just not. It just doesn't work anymore in terms of every year late night the viewership goes down for network television. The money is just not there. It seems that that it's going to be more like what Byron Allen is doing, which is he's taping 5 shows in a day. He is
It's safe.
a lot of
It's
a lot of
safe,
those
if
shows,
I may.
yeah,
You know,
a
but
lot
go
of
ahead.
those shows have I think every one of those shows, maybe not Seth Meyers, but most of them have 20 plus writers. And I think like if they do those again, Carson only had like 6 or 7 at the most. I think the number of writers are going to be scaled down. I think it's just going to be more scaled down. I don't think anything like Letterman or Carson, what they were doing, is going to be. It's going to be hard to do something like that long term. Like occasionally, like Netflix did something with John Mulaney where it was once in a while, something
Yeah.
like that. But to sustain something, to do 180 episodes a year, I think that would be tricky economically to figure
I
out how to make that work.
couldn't agree more, man. And honestly, listen,
Yeah.
I love Colbert, and I always have, and I think he
He's
is
a nice man.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
great to hear, and it seems
Yeah.
like that. And I even used to see him when he was at Second City here in
Yeah.
Chicago and stuff. So yeah, I've been a long time fan. That said, that Ed Sullivan Theater has got to be ridiculously expensive to maintain.
Yeah,
I
CBS got it for 5 million, but it was in shambles, and they had to put so much money to refurbish. And then when he got it, to Steven's credit, and this was something I was very worried about, is that there were a lot of obscured seats for Dave Letterman where the audience they couldn't see, and it definitely affected the audience and their laughter and lack of laughter. And Colbert was very much like, I want every seat to be you can see what's going on, and I think that was a really smart thing. So they redid all those seats
wow,
um for that. But no, it is. I'm sure it's so much to everything just to maintain, and
it's
I'm really
ancient.
glad that they did
It's
give
ancient,
him.
man.
Yeah, yeah.
The
I'm
rats
glad
alone, for Christ's sake.
I'm glad that they gave him a bunch of more months, and I forget how many months, 6, 7 months left, But it never occurred to me that you could be number one and get your show taken away. But like, I just don't really get, because some of the other shows, they'll like start scaling you back. Like, we're gonna cut this. Like Seth Meyers, they cut the band.
Yep.
You'd think that they would have done those things with Colbert Show, and to my knowledge, none of that stuff was ever done to like anything sizable. So
Well,
I didn't think there was any foreshadowing. Like, I mean, if they take away your band, that's a big signal that you might not be safe. But
well, if you want to comment on this, that's fine. But I've been saying to friends, the suggestion, again, in that panel thing you did with John and Bill Carter,
yeah.
and when Bill brought up the fact that, he's gunning for the Colbert job, Byron Allen, and it's like, what? And it's like, and that's what I was saying. He's safe. He's got the A-list comedians. They do that Comics Unleashed or whatever the hell it's called, which is such an oxymoron of what we actually get. It's ridiculously safe. But that's why, like, on the surface, it looks like, I mean, really, I hate to compare it because I felt bad for him back in the day. It's like when Pat Sajak was hosting at CBS, where it's like, oh, there's a familiar face. And oh, he's got guests, but he doesn't have the magic. And I think it's death by a thousand cuts. And again, you'll forgive my tin hat theory on this, but I almost wonder if CBS would put somebody like that in to drive down the ratings and be like, and make some financial deal that makes sense and go, well, gee, the audience isn't there anymore, so we're not going to do this anymore. It doesn't have the value.
No idea. I don't know. Byron Allen is such a brilliant businessman. I can see him figuring out a way to make it work. And then he makes all these programs evergreen, no politics, so you could run these things for years.
Yeah.
And years. And apparently everyone that does the show signs something where you get X amount of money and there's no residuals. So it seems like he figured out the model if you're going to do a scaled back version of one of these things.
I think he can do it. I'm even just more saying from the tin hat standpoint that I'm suggesting from the network standpoint of, because
I don't know.
The value is, again, in that even in the pre-cable world, you watch the late night show and they wanted you to, and that way when you turned on your TV when you're having breakfast, it's still the same channel. That doesn't exist anymore.
No, everything's changed. It's what it is. Hopefully some sort of late night show will always exist, probably on YouTube or something. But it's just it's a shame that the kind of like the bigger type shows, which I always thought would be around, might not. Like, I think if Jimmy Kimmel chooses not to re-up, I can't imagine ABC replacing him with a late night show. I could be off on that. So I think Kimmel's going to probably re-up just for that fact, but I could be off.
Well, and I know too, and I don't mean this in any disparaging way, but he really is employing so many of literally his family and friends. And they have careers because of his show. That's great. I mean, I give him a lot of credit.
It's a really good group of people. Whenever I've gone over to visit, when I've been in Los Angeles, everyone, it's a nice environment, and I do like people over there. So I hope that they keep going.
And I think Carter really did a good job of explaining Fallon, because I liked him on SNL just fine. But I had to admit, as the monologues of the other shows got more and more political, Fallon wasn't doing it. And Bill, I think, rightfully pointed out, Fallon's the party show. And Fallon is the safe show where the A-listers that don't want to lose half their audience and step out politically, like a Taylor Swift, although she has had her political brief moments, but that they know they're not going to have to go on and say the current administration is X, whether they like it or not, and not worry about it. Stallone and the Kimmel kerfuffle that happened last year, and word got back to him, and Stallone's like, I'm not going to do Kimmel. He doesn't respect me. The hell with him. And that. It's not going to happen for Fallon. Fallon tousled Trump's hair, for example, and
it's Fallon. I mean, it's a safe show. I think he, like Johnny, does not do humor at people's expenses normally. Not that the other people don't, but I think he does very safe, and people seem safe with him. So yeah.
Again, taste for other people, I guess. But no, it honestly. We are self-evident of this, both of us doing the podcasts we do with interviews. I can't deny. It's so funny. I think, didn't Carson himself say someday everybody's going to have their own talk show or something? Wasn't there some quote to that effect?
There was something like at the end, he was talking about the facts, like the figures. The population when we started in 1962 was like this many people, and then all these different and then statistics. And by this year, half the population will have their own late night talk show, something like that. He'd be in the poker game with Chevy Chase and be like, Chevy, you really want to do this 5 nights a week? And very politely warned him how hard it was going to be. He did the same thing with Roseanne. And he's like tried to talk her out of singing the Star Spangled Banner when she was going to sing it at the Padres game. And he's like, it's the hardest song to sing. You sure you want to do this? And she famously did not. Well, it's not famously because people don't remember that Carson warned her. She went ahead and did it. And it was like outrage. And maybe it was good publicity overall. But you have the president of the United States, George Herbert Walker Bush, called her disgraceful. But yeah, Johnny tried to warn her.
Crazy. That's the kind of story you'll find, everybody, and love Johnny Carson. I can't urge you enough to buy this book. It's excellent.
Oh, thank you.
And yeah, well, hey man, you did the work. So good for
I
you.
tried. I felt like this weight of responsibility to try to get the thing right. So
what? And also David Ritz, who's your co-author?
David Ritz is unbelievable. I was so overwhelmed to write a book that I had all these interviews, and I reached out to 6 authors, 4 that I did not know, and that were very successful. And David was very intrigued. We didn't know each other. And we just got on the phone. We had a lot of talks, and he's like, let's try this. And we got a book deal. And David has done books one-on-one with Don Rickles, Ray Charles, Willie Nelson. So he knew all the Aretha Franklin. So he knew all these people. So just the fact that I was able to work with somebody as accomplished as a David Ritz was unbelievable. He did Paul Schaefer's book. It was one of those things. I just cold emailed him, and I was like, 6 people, and I'm like, this is my last hurrah. Like, if this works, this works. If it doesn't, there's no book. And it just happened that David and I hit it off. So,
well, I hope you're chronicling your late nighter interviews that you're doing, because again, like Carter has been able to do through his job, we get a great picture. And this whole phenomenon of late night talk, I think, and just late night programming in general. What do you think of the Brits and Lorne Michaels doing a Saturday Night Live in England? I've heard that, and I don't know
think
when
it's
going to
interesting.
happen.
Yeah, I know that they have don't they have an SNL version in Korea, or I think maybe I don't know. But I think the thing that I'm most interested in is 2 things. If they're gonna make everyone stay up Tuesday night in the middle of the night to write for no reason, they could just write during the day. If they're gonna keep that the crazy production schedule for no reason, and if the environment is going to be as high pressured, which I don't know if it has to be, but it's just the way it is. It's like, this is how it was in 75. We're just going to keep it that the people were going to be nocturnal and stay up all night to write. So I don't know. I hope it succeeds, and be interesting.
Well, and also they've had a much longer success sticking with sketch comedy in a way that American television didn't, with the exception of Saturday Night Live.
Yeah,
And
that's true. Sketch is more over there for sure. Yeah.
And that's why a part of me is like, because it's weird. I've been listening to a lot of the pop culture pundits, and I don't think it's going to work. And I'm like, really? You guys are not necessarily the news. You guys are all these other great show, Hugh Laurie and Stephen Fry and all these great sketch shows over the decades.
The thing that I feel like they're paying money for is the format. Lorne Michaels, and I give him so much credit, did not invent sketch comedy by any means. He was responsible for this a brilliant blueprint, which is that you get you have a group of sketch performers that are unknown for the most part when they start. You have a host and a music guest, and you do update, and that's your model. And that framework has lasted 50 years, and Lauren is brilliant because he can deal with both the network and the creative. Most people cannot do both, and he just was born to do this. So it'll be interesting to see what can happen over there. But I think that framework is just like it's sustained for decades, and I think if they want it to keep going, it'll keep. I mean, it's constant. I mean, you just get the new host, new music, stay relevant. They probably maybe do rely a little bit too much maybe on like the surprise walk-ons, but I guess now there's just so much competition and noise and attention that they feel maybe they have to rely on that maybe a little bit too much here and there. But I still think that they do a phenomenal job.
They do a great job. My concern is having 18 cast members. And it's like, man, that's a shit ton.
To me, what it seems like that what they do with a lot of that is almost like that they're in Vegas and they want to play as many hands as possible to see what hits, like which new cast member is going to hit with the public, and they
Sure.
aren't really sure. And it seems like that's why the cast is so big with the newbies, that they'll like, let's see who hits with the public. And it's tough. Like, I mean, I don't understand. I mean, I understand both. Like when the original show was 7 people, then when Lauren came back in '85, it was a small cast. In '86 was I think 7 people plus featured player with Kevin Nealon, and maybe Ben Stiller was there for just a little bit, but then
Right.
he left. But it's really, really is hard to develop as a new person when you have that many people. But it seems like the strategy, and if I had to guess, was we are going to put as many new people as possible and see who gets over with the public. And there's one, Ashley Padilla, I think that's how you say her name.
Yes.
She's the one right now that they
No question.
clearly is the I think she's in her second year. I think it's her second
Yes.
year. And she's, I mean, breakout star for sure.
Clearly.
And I think that's what they're looking for with going with that many new people. It seems that way. That's my guess.
It's very Darwinian, though. It really is survival of the fittest. And I feel for the various featured players from the last couple of years, like Punky Johnson and some of the others, or and
That's
some
tough.
of the other
They're
names.
all really good and nice,
And they didn't make it. They didn't make the cut. But
it's
also
tough. I was surprised with some of them. Yeah, I was surprised Heidi Gardner. You never know with budget reasons or what is going on, but I was very surprised.
It was weird that it was their decision, but at least she got 8 years. I mean, she had her
She
career
did.
there. You know,
I just normally when somebody stays there that long, Lauren wants them to stay indefinitely.
I was surprised.
So I was surprised about that, but they're doing a great job, and the fact that that man's been able to maintain the show for this many years is unbelievable, and the testament to his eye, people that he's been able to discover, both writers and performers, and to be able to handle the network is an unbelievable skill set. I mean, I don't know a lot of people that could do that. I definitely think if somebody's going to be the successor, Tina Fey does know how to deal with the network from working on shows, and I think she'd probably be the most logical choice. She lives in New York.
Yeah.
I think her kids, by the time she would take the gig, might be out of the house. Maybe they'll be older, certainly. But I think she probably could do this. That probably could do it. But
I agree.
Definitely dealing with the network, Lorne Michaels. I don't think anybody is better.
Well, he's got decades on them, so when a junior vice president's going to try and tell him what to do, it's like, yeah, how you doing? I'm Lorne Michaels.
Well, like just his the notes in between, like during the dress rehearsal, I've talked to the writers, and it'll be like Lorne a lot of times will not be giving notes about the comedy. It'll be like, okay, change the lighting here, change this costume, like stuff that like nobody else would really notice or think about, but. So the notes a lot of times aren't even with cutting this joke or things like that, but his eye, he has a training that I think a skill set that I don't think anyone else has.
Are you gonna like try to get Heidi Gardner and some of the other ex-cast members that have recently left after they maybe have some time? Are you thinking along those lines?
I'd love to. I've tried. It's just so hard. As I've told some of my friends recently, it does seem like public figures being asked to do podcasts, it seems like the new jury duty a little bit, that they're constantly being asked to do podcasts, and they do the podcasts that are necessary, like their good friends are the ones that are like the big ones, but anybody else like me, it's like for the most part, it's just harder. It seems like they're just, at least from the publicist, like I don't even think they ask them half the time that when they're very big.
True.
It just seems like they just turn it down. But I would love to talk to a Heidi Gardner or anybody. I've tried to reach out to some of the other people, but the amount of podcasts they are asked to do,
I'm sure,
I know is just astronomical. So when I was doing my podcast, when I started, I had to explain to people what a podcast was.
Yes.
And it was just, it was one of those things. You couldn't even record like this. That's why I was, at the time, was in people's living rooms and in offices all around Los Angeles and New York. So the times have changed. Back then, a famous person having a podcast did not really exist. I mean, it was unheard of. And now it's like presidents have podcasts.
Well, that's right, man. I feel comfortable having done this for 20 years. But every now and then I do get that momentary cringe of, man, especially when they make fun in movies, and I forget, or a television show, and it was like a 10-year-old kid yelling at his grandmother, "Grandma, you promised to be on my podcast." I'm like, well, don't do that. Please don't do that. No. you know.
No, I think people still do a great job. It's just like there's a lot more noise, and I think that there's probably some people that
Yes.
have podcasts just for the sake of doing it. But if people do a good job, such as yourself, I'm always happy to do it. I don't put myself in their shoes at all.
I
It's always an
understand.
honor to talk to somebody that's especially a broadcaster, that's somebody that has that experience and that knows what they're talking about. So it's always an honor to do something like this with you.
Well, that's very kind, man. And
Yeah.
honestly, you're selling yourself short because those 8 years for doing the Carson
We
podcast,
did 8 years, yeah.
yeah, that's a lot, man. And truly, and also again, before everybody else jumped in the pool. And I mean, you think about it, Mark. We outlived Skype for God's sake,
I
which is
can't believe
insane.
that. Yeah, it was definitely one of those things. The timing was good. Everybody wanted to talk about Johnny Carson, which I didn't realize was going to happen. And unfortunately, of those 400 plus people, it seems like 40 or 50 of them have left this earth.
Oh,
So I mean,
man.
I feel very fortunate to get the stories from so many of them before they left us.
Well, these are the reasons why people really need to read Love Johnny Carson. And also, thank God the archive is still there of the Carson podcast.
Oh yeah, it's
And
still there. Yes.
good, good, man.
Yeah.
Hey, man, seriously, we are literally, even me and my little
Yeah.
nerddom of comic
Yeah.
books and the stuff I cover,
Sure.
we are covering 20th century pop culture,
That's
which
fantastic.
vital and interesting. And
Yeah.
also, Mark, you're on the younger end of it. I got a couple decades
Yeah.
on you. But that said, I really believe that people from 40 to whatever age you're still internet savvy, they want this kind of content. They want to hear these
Sure.
stories. They want
No, I
because
think so. They're
this is the
important.
shit that they
I
love.
love. I think it's great you're doing this, and I applaud you. And yeah, it's an honor to be back on your show, and I'd love to come back again.
That would be my pleasure, man. And
Yeah,
truly, I'm thrilled that you and John and Bill are going to have more conversations because I
yeah.
think the evolution of late night will continue. And
I,
as an observer, I would really love your point of view. So you've been
I
really kind with
appreciate
your
that.
time, Mark. Thanks
Yeah,
so
it's nice
much.
talking to you again. Take care. We'll talk soon.